Hello and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Remembrancers Library podcast. My name is Vincent, as always, and again, Ethan is still on break. I am batch recording all of these episodes for the Battle of Calth, so these were all done in 1 week, so it'll just be me again for you today, continuing on with the last bit of the Battle of Calth, as well as all of the offshoot battles and some that were related but going on in a different location. Before I jump right into that, though, I will get our usual house cleaning out of the way. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate all of the support that we've been getting. All of the engagement has been absolutely fantastic. So if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to us on our YouTube. If you're liking the videos, drop us a like and leave us a comment if you have anything to share. If you have any questions about anything, if you have any more information to add, anything like that at all, as well if you're on the Spotify, feel free to give us a like and a download. And of course, wherever you are listening to us from, feel free to share us around if you know anybody who might enjoy our stuff. But with that, I will jump right into the episode. So just to sum up the end of the battle where we left off last week, as I said, more than half of the mustered Ultramarines were lost in the initial battle, and hundreds of thousands more would be lost, or maybe not hundreds of thousands, but many were killed fighting in the underground battle, which I will get into today. And yeah, the Word Bearers were not successful in their mission to exterminate the Marines, but they also still had, well, I'll get into this later as well, but Lorgar, the word bearers that were left on Calth weren't technically a loss to Lorgar, but I will get into that in a little bit here as well. So after everything, Guilliman sets a hasty course for Terra. Unfortunately, he doesn't end up making it back in time to fight during the Siege of Terra, which our next couple of episodes will be about after I wrap this one up. And yeah, he doesn't make it back in time, but just the fact that he's on his way to Terra does turn the tides later in the battle. Who else were we keeping tabs on? Oh, right. Erebus. He didn't really care how the outcome of the battle went in terms of which army won and which army lost. His main goal was just to get the ritual done that he was working on, and the specifics of that ritual was that it was to dedicate the destruction of Calth to the Chaos Gods, and that was a success. The secondary thing that happened when he was able to finish this ritual is that he was able to fully summon the Ruin Storm. So, and I can't remember if there's a little bit of discrepancy here, so I feel like we've talked about the Ruin Storm already, but according to the research that I did for this episode, this is where it's officially up and the galaxy is now completely divided. Who is next? Lorgar. So he dipped pretty early on into the battle to go and cause more havoc throughout the Ultramar segment. But like I said, this wasn't a complete loss to him, and he found his own success in the fact that he was able to make Guilliman lose his mind, lose his temper, and pledge to kill his own brother. So that was his own success. And then civilians who were on Calth, they, as many as could, were evacuated with the Marines into the cavern systems. And the cavern systems, I'll get into this a bit more as well. The citizens of Calth had already sort of prepared these caverns for the eventuality that they would need to live in them as bunkers. So they're actually pretty okay down there. And then there were on the surface of the planet a couple of cities and a couple of starports that were shielded enough that they were able to survive up there even with the radiation. The Ultramarines that were able to get away would eventually go on a little revenge party and destroy the home planet of Lorgar, which was Clotius. And the other interesting thing is that according to the Ultramarines' official record, when Guilliman started the mark at Mark 0, the whole battle took place approximately in 24 hours, but the mark wasn't stopped at that point. As of the present in Warhammer lore, the mark is still running, as Guilliman decided that the mark won't stop until Lorgar and every single one of the word bearers have been eradicated from the universe. So that's fun. But yeah, that's kind of the main overview of the end of the battle. But now I will get into some little shorter stories about things that were going on, and I will start with one of the battles that actually happened at the same time as the beginning of the Battle of Calth, but in a different city on the planet. In the city of Ithaca, which was another city on Calth, there was a battle between two Titan legions. Now, just for anybody who doesn't know, the Titans have their own legions. They're not part of a Space Marine legion, but within those legions there were traitors and loyalists alike. So this particular battle was between the True Messengers. Their fancy name is the Legio Praesagius. Either way, I'm going to call them the True Messengers, and then the Fire Masters. So these guys were all, so there were both legions of the Titans on the ground in Ithaca. This was their get ready spot for getting ready for the invasion of the orcs. And at the same time as the word bearers opened fire on the Ultramarines in the initial phases of the Battle of Calth, the Fire Masters opened fire on the True Messengers. And this would go back and forth for quite a while. But then as the orbital bombardments of all of the ships was going on and all of that jazz, there was a ship called the Arutan, which it had been holding, it was holding the majority of the True Messengers Titan troops. And I'm not sure if it was coming down to the planet or lifting off and then got crashed down again. I'm not 100% sure, but the entire battle then kind of revolved around the True Messengers trying to get into their ship to get more of their units to fight the Fire Masters, and then the Fire Masters trying to not let the True Messengers get their troops. And in all of the chaos and destruction of the entire rest of the Battle of Calth, it's not known if there was, if either of them pulled ahead, if either of them were victorious. Most likely they were all destroyed, but nobody really knows if there was a victory before the total destruction. But I digress. That one was a pretty simple one. I will hop into the next one. So the next little skirmish that I'm going to talk about happened basically directly as the Battle of Calth was ending, as all of the surviving Ultramarines were fleeing into the caverns. There was a group, a company, the 21st Company, led by Captain Ericon Gaius. They had already been bunkered down in a railway tunnel that was part of the transportation system of Calth, and this tunnel led directly to Numinous City. And they had a pretty good spot in there, and I'm assuming they were out of range of the radiation, and they were defending this spot from a squad of word-bearers who were trying to get the spot. While this was going on, Numinous is the city, I said that already. Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard would appear out of nowhere, and he was on a mission for Malcador the Sigillite. Now, I'm not 100% sure, because Nathaniel Garrow was a traitor by this point. I'm not sure if Malcador knew this or not, but Malcador was essentially trying to start an Imperial Inquisition to start weeding out traitors in the Imperium, other than the obvious ones already. But yeah, Malcador was on this mission to start an Inquisition, and he had started recruiting some people and then sending those people out to find more people. It was definitely not a pyramid scheme, but he had sent Garrow to Calth to try to recruit a guy named Tylos Rubio. And he had been a codicier, which is a fancy rank for librarians. Malcador wanted this guy on the Inquisition because he had knowledge and he also had the skills to get more knowledge. And Rubio, at first, he was absolutely refusing to leave his company, but the word bearers that were attacking their spot had them greatly outnumbered, and Rubio realized as Garrow was standing there that they weren't going to survive if drastic measures were not taken. So he also had psyker abilities, and he used those in this moment. I don't know if he did so intentionally or if he was just feeling really heightened emotions and it just kind of happened, but he was able to save his company. He was able to defeat the word bearers that were attacking them, and he did save his brothers that he didn't want to leave, but he used his psyker abilities. That is very much against the Council of Nicaea, even if you are doing it to save an entire company, which is kind of bull, but oh well. So he would then leave with Garrow because he would be outcast from the Imperium for breaking the law. So he did get on the Stormbird and he left with Garrow. And that is sort of all we know there. I'm sure that might come up later on, but in terms of the Battle of Calth, that is the end of that story. This section is going to be a short one, but is... And not much happens, but it is important to know that something happened. So not on Mars, but after Horus had got the Mechanicum on his side, the Magos, Mechanicum, all those, the guys from Mars, those guys. There's too many M names, but anyways. The former Fabricator General, Kelbor Hall, had been secretly building a ship, and I'm not sure if this was at Lorgar's behest or at Horus's, but either way, he was building this huge ship, and they were doing it on a secret moon of some planet somewhere, but they built this massive battleship, and it was named the Furious Abyss. It was equipped with virus bombs, cyclonic torpedoes, all of the, heaviest stuff that they could get on this ship. And the mission that this ship was created for was to put across the galaxy to Macragge, the planet, not the ship, but Guilliman's home planet, and then they were supposed to bomb the planet, destroy the planet, and as well as the moon of Macragge as well. And they were going to do this while the Battle of Calth was ongoing, because then all of the Ultramarines would not be home, and they would be able to take it over pretty easily. Now, unfortunately for the Word Bearers and Kelbor Hall and all them guys, there was an Ultramarine task force that figured out what was going on, and they were able to stop this ship as it was on its way to Macragge and destroy it, though they did end up all dying themselves, all of these Ultramarines. They sacrificed themselves to save their entire planet, which is good, because that's what the Ultramarines do. But yeah, that was basically all that was. The ship went on its maiden voyage and was destroyed. And that was the end of that. Going back quickly to... I mentioned in the last episode that the Macragge's Honor ship and the ship that Corferon got onto to escape, which was the Infidus Imperator, they would end up going on a goose chase and then would engage in the most epic naval battle of Warhammer history. So that is what I'm going to talk about now. So yeah, like I said, they immediately left the battle. Guilliman had ordered First Master Marius Gage to follow the traitors on the Macragge's Honor, because that was the first ship that was going to be able to follow them, as well as the ship that would be the most well-equipped to do so. So the first skirmish between the two ships wasn't anything special. It was just a couple rounds of fire back and forth, and it was looking like the Macragg's Honor was definitely going to be able to have the upper hand here. The Infidus Imperator looked like it wasn't really going to stand a chance. Notably, the Imperator had sent 3 escort cruisers out to go back towards the Macragg's Honor and kind of distract it, get in the way, slow it down, all of that good stuff. But the Honor was able to just cruise right through them. Heavy firepower, and also just imagine you're driving down the highway and you hit a patch of bugs. That's basically how this went down. And while this chase is going on, just for perspective on how Gage and Corferon are both doing, Gage was stationed in the main bridge of the Honor. I'm assuming they must have got it resealed from the previous destruction by the demons, and he was calling shots there with some assistance from the acting shipmaster, and this guy was named Juan Hamid. All the while, Gage, he was having minor surgery at the moment. During the demon attack, he had one of his hands ripped off. So while he is ordering around the crew of the Honor, chasing the Imperator, he's having a new hand put on, basically. And Corferon, he's not doing much better. He's actually probably doing worse at this point, because as we remember, Guilliman ripped out one of his hearts. So Corferon, he was also operating out of the main bridge of the Imperator, but the crew had quickly thrown together like a medic station, so they were also working on putting him back together while he was calling the shots. And his second in command for all of this was a guy named Antonis Antwerk, which is, that's quite the name. Either way, the Honor stayed in hot pursuit of the Imperator, and they got pretty close. They were about mid-range, and they exchanged fire, and the Honor would slowly continue to gain on the Imperator, and they went from exchanging fire at mid-range to volleying at point blank. They were just like absolutely insane amounts of firepower at point blank. As they were getting closer, and even while they were still actively firing, the Ultramarines were attempting to board the Imperator. I don't know why I keep pausing so much before I say that, but the Imperator. They had boarding tube things that would go out across the ship. There were like launch pod missile things that the Marines would be in and then get shot into the hull of the other ship and all that good stuff. Now, Corferon had been waiting for the Ultramarines to try to begin boarding the Imperator, because he had a secret plan in his back pocket. He had groups of cultists start pretty quick rituals and summon a bunch of warp demons, which killed so many Marines just as they were trying to get in between the ships, and it did damage the exterior of the Honor quite badly. There was also, at the same time, hundreds of the traitors, as well as more demons that got teleported into the Macragg's Honor as a result of this ritual. Gage, for the second time this day, would lead combat parties to get rid of all of the demons off of his ship, and while the Marines and Gage were occupied dealing with the demons and the word bearers that had teleported onto the ship, the Imperator was able to detach from like the boarding tube things, and they started getting away again. However, it didn't take very long for the Honor to get into pursuit again, and they knew that the Imperator was trying to get to a point where they could safely get into the warp, so they were gunning to try and get to the Imperator before they could do that. However, Corferon had another handy-dandy tool tucked away to throw off the Ultramarines. He had the Anathema Blade with him still, and used it to cut a hole into the Materium in front of the ship so that they could just hop right into the warp instead of going through an actual like warp gate. They just kind of Kool-Aid manned their way into the warp. Gage was shocked, but of course followed pursuit because that was his order, and also I'm sure that he just wanted to do this anyways. So the thing is, though, is that the Honor wasn't Like, it was equipped enough to do the occasional warp travel, but it wasn't like all decked out. It didn't have all the bells and whistles. So what you can imagine for this here is that the Honor is like a Dodge Caravan trying to follow a Forerunner into the muddy trails of the backwoods. But they were keeping up pretty okay, surprisingly. They're a Dodge Caravan, but it's driven by one of those guys that do the crazy car shows that I can't remember any of the names of right now. The British guys that do the car shows. Anywho, I digress. The Imperator crew noticed that the Honor's engines were really struggling to keep up, even though that they were still trying to keep up. The other thing is that with the Honor not having the best warp technology, even the modest stuff that they did have was not working because they were not following the typical channels of going through the warp. So they had zero navigation and zero, like, they had nothing. They are just going on the fact that they can see the Imperator. They are on visuals only. And I'm guessing that Corferon realized this at some point, and he realized that if he was able to get the Imperator to get enough speed that they could get out of the Honor's line of sight, they would be in the clear. So he starts preparations for this, but Corferon also had, his personal vendetta against Guilliman at this point, and because he hadn't been able to kill Guilliman or convert him to chaos, either way. He lost to Guilliman. He decided that at the very least he was gonna get back at Guilliman by destroying his flagship. And basically the plan was to get out of sight of the Honor, but instead of then just continuing to run, to turn around and open fire, because they had good enough comms and scanners and all of that good jazz that they would be able to accurately fire on the Honor without the Honor being able to see them. So the Imperator manage to get out of sight, and the Honor was trying to keep up, but did end up getting delayed by some warp entities that got through the ship's shields and all of that, so they had to slow down to take care of that, and they did lose sight of the Imperator. In the skirmish against the warp entities, and also from just the initial trying to board the Imperator, the Ultramarines lost almost 90% of their battle force, and majority of I believe as far as Gage could tell at this point, all of the boarding parties that had gotten onto the Imperator had been wiped out by this point. They had absolutely no contact. So he knew that they weren't going to be able to try another boarding battle, and things were looking pretty grim. Also, now that they have lost sight of the Imperator, they have absolutely no direction, and they are stuck in the warp for the foreseeable future. Anyways, back to Corferon. So he got out of sight, turned back around, and started firing on the Honor. And they still had bits of the Octid scrap code that was now in the Imperator, but it was helpful to them in that ship. There wasn't a whole lot of backup information for that, but the Octid is still doing its malicious stuff, and Farron managed to get 2 shots on the Honor, which severely damaged the ship, and one more shot would destroy the entire ship. The entire ship would just be gone if they got hit one more time. So on the Honor, the acting shipmaster who I mentioned before, Hamid, he thought that they should at least try to fire back, even though they didn't have a visual. The chances would be very, very small, but at least he wanted to at least try instead of just waiting to die. And Gage thought that was a great idea, but just before they started, because the plan was to just fire in all directions, basically, hoping that maybe they would hit, because they didn't know where the Imperator was, so they were just going to fire in all directions. So just before they finalized the shots, they were contacted by the sole surviving Ultramarine that was on board the Imperator. He was currently up against an entire squad of word bearers, but he was able to establish contact, and he also put up a homing beacon on his own location. And he told Gage as well as Hamid to lock in on his location on that homing beacon and use that to be able to fire at the Imperator. The Imperator. For whatever reason, that name just won't stick in my mind. Anyways, so they did get a huge hit onto the Imperator and were eventually able to destroy it with that beacon location. Now, unfortunately, Corferon, he still had that anathema that he previously used to cut a hole in the Materium. He did it again and took a small group of his guard again and a small group of word bearers and got off of the ship, and then the ship was no more. So at this point, Gage on the McCragg's Honor, they are lost in the warp. However, while I was reading, I saw something about how in the 41st millennium, there's they have been seen again in the 41st millennium, so they must have made it out at some point, but I couldn't find any solid information on that. But that is the Battle of McCragg's Honor, the most epic battle that has gone down between two ships ever. So, the last battle that I'll talk about today is the Underground Battle, and that is where, as I mentioned, the surviving Ultramarines and word bearers, as well as civilians of Calth, went into the cavern systems and tried to hold their ground in there. Now, the Underground Battle it lasted quite a long time. As far as I could find, it ran from 007 to 014 of the 31st millennium. I know Ethan has explained how the dates work. I, at this moment, don't remember, so if you know, that's fantastic. I think that it's years, so I think this is a 7-year war, but don't hold me to it. Either way, so just to recap, Corferon tried to blow up the sun, which was called Viridia. This is the Viridian system. It's the Viridian, or the Viridia star, or whatever. Didn't go supernova from the fire, but it was irreversibly damaged and unstable and was shooting off lethal amounts of radiation. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Lorgar, the losses, technically, all of the word bearers that he chose to leave on Calth were strategic losses. This was sort of a third purge of his legion. He chose word bearers that he knew had, they were overcome by their hate for the Ultramarines. I'm assuming these are probably word bearers that weren't Terran. These were ones that would have come from Clotius. So knowing that these guys were probably more emotionally unstable, unreliable, etc., Lorgar chose these ones to sort of, if they died, that's fine. He knew that they would put up a good fight against the Ultramarines, but if they didn't make it, that was okay because they were unreliable anyways. So that's that. And as the radiation was going on, Guilliman ordered all of the Ultramarines to go underground, survive as long as possible, and he promised that he would come back to extract them at some point in time whenever he could. And like I said earlier in last week's episode, it was around Mark 24, so 24 hours after the beginning of the battle, that they went underground. They took as many civilians as they possibly could, as well as they were able to join up with more of the Loyalist Mechanicus troops, and they would join with the Ultramarines, and they would cover the retreat into the cavern system because as cyborgs, they're immune to radiation, or at least very, very resistant. So they took the tail end, and they made their way into the caverns. And as I said, the citizens of Calth had kind of prepared the caverns for this sort of a situation, and any of the caverns that had been sort of manufactured isn't the word that I want, but modified's better. They were called arcologies, and they were all named and they were all prepared to be like backup cities, and they were big enough to hold a city and army troops and all that jazz. And as soon as the word bearers got down there, they tried to just get as many of these arcologies possible and fortify them. And other smaller groups of the word bearers would stalk the cavern system and use guerrilla warfare to ambush the loyalists whenever they could. Being underground and Calth being destroyed, there was very little communication between groups of the loyalists and between groups of the traitors. So the word bearers were basically entirely isolated and cut off in their small groups. So they kind of just they became cavemen essentially. They started foraging, scavenging for whatever they could, and also began to just follow the whims of the chaos gods. Namely, in the first couple of months being underground, the word bearers would commit many atrocities, many terrible things. There was one company called the Graven Star, and they were led by, I think I mentioned this guy last time, Holbeloth. Yeah, he was one of the two that kind of took over the lead for the word bearers after Lorgar disappeared. He led the Graven Star. They took over one of the arcologies and ritually sacrificed all of the civilians that were in there. And similarly, at a similar time, a bunch of cultists entered a different shelter and detonated a bunch of atomic bombs from inside, killing all of the civilians there. Another thing that happened, there was a dark apostle of the word bearers. His name was Malak Cartho. He sacrificed his own men, including Fodral Fell, who was the other guy that took charge with Holbeloth. Cartho sacrificed him and a bunch of men in an attempt to lure Captain Ventinus out of hiding, and then was going to kill Ventinus and his squad with a virus. But Ventinus was able to intervene and stop the bomb from going off, and Holbeloth did pop up quickly. He was now a demon spawn, and Ventinus was able to kill him at the same time as stopping the bomb. And then he threw Cartho and the bomb. Cartho had opened up a warp rift, and Ventinus threw him back in there, which stopped Cartho from being able to basically genocide the Ultramarines with that virus bomb. But once he got into the warp, Cartho was turned into a demon prince because of all of the atrocities and ritual sacrifications. Sacrifications? Is that the right word? Sacrifices? Either way, he did a bunch of bad things and was turned into a demon prince for it. So yeah, that all kind of happened within the first couple of months. Getting past that, sort of a few months into, a bunch of the word bearers started getting corrupted by Nurgle in the caves and whatever. They were just like losing their minds. And a group of these corrupted word bearers would come across the 547th Company of Marines and attack them as they were ought to do. This traitor group was able to corrupt a consul chaplain of the 547th. His name was Ankarion. They were able to corrupt him, and then they massacred the civilians and defenders. Oh, this happened in one of the arcologies. I think it was the Aurora arcology. But yeah, they wiped out the civilians and defenders and took one of the Ultramarines to the side of Chaos. Now, before the arcology fell completely, someone was able to send out a message to another company of Ultramarines that were in a different arcology, and they sent it was really hard to make out what they were saying, but this was the 4th Destroyer Company of the 22nd chapter of the Ultramarines. They knew that something was wrong and were ready to send a rescue unit to go and help out. This unit was led by Captain Thesian of the 4th Destroyer Company. They got to the Aurora arcology, and when they got there, they only saw dead bodies of the 547th as well as the civilians and whatnot, but were quickly ambushed by the Nurgle corrupted word bearers, as well as the undead, the reanimated corpses of their brothers from the 547th, which is so fantastic. So they would go back and forth. The 547th would suffer heavy losses. The 547th have been wiped out. The 4th Company would suffer heavy losses, but they did manage to push through to the center of the arcology, to the strategium, which I'm assuming is just like the control base of the little city place. And there they found Ankarian, the chaplain guy that had been corrupted, with more of the undead, zombies, whatnot. Thesian was absolutely outraged that this other guy would fall to chaos and immediately started attacking him and all that good stuff. He would have to sacrifice himself in order to kill Ankarian. The 4th Company would be victorious against word bearers. Sergeant Cassian was a part of the 4th, and he took the lead after Thesian was not able to do so anymore because he was killed. And after the whole battle went down, Cassian would report to the Ultramarine HQ that they had kind of established down here, and was authorized to bomb this arcology. The Auroran arcology was totally bombed after this, just to make sure that none of the Nurgle influence would be able to get back out. As the war continued over the next, by my assumptions, 7 years, there would be heavy losses, and many Marines would just go nuts being stuck down here, or they would willfully join. There was quite a number of Ultramarines that would join the Wordbearer traders. But either way, eventually in 009 of M31, so I'm assuming that's 2 years into the battle, there would be some Ultramarines relief forces that would be deployed and make their way down to help support the Ultramarines that have been stuck down in the cavern systems. And when this happened, there was a group of word bearers who took over an Ultramarine stronghold, and they were able to capture one of the captains here. They wanted to use him as a vessel for a demon that they were going to summon, but Thiel, the guy who I talked about last episode, who had been kind of strategizing about having Marines fight Marines, he was able to jump in and save the captain. But with this skirmish, the word bearers were able to see that there were new Ultramarines on the battleground, and they realized at this point, they kind of started thinking about it, and they did realize now that Lorgar had left them for dead. With this, some of them just went more crazy. There was one that would be later known as the Anchorite. He would kind of have this epiphany that Lorgar's path to chaos was not a good thing, really, and he did surrender to the Ultramarines. I couldn't tell if he surrendered his whole group or if just himself surrendered, but either way, everybody's having epiphanies. The Ultramarines would eventually be victorious. Some of the traders would be able to escape the planet and return to the Wordbearers in the confusion, and this cavern system spans the entire planet. So some of them were able to get out, and that included some of the trader Ultramarines as well. But eventually, Calth would be able to go back to quote-unquote normal. The radiation was still happening, but they were able to turn it back into, they were able to bring back the infrastructure and the factories and all that good stuff, and Calth could become the powerhouse that it once was. But with that is all that I have to talk about for the end of the Battle of Calth. There might, of course, be more. Ethan might have some to add later on, but the Battle of Calth was absolutely huge. It won't be as huge as the Siege of Terra, but this was a huge war that had so many losses on both sides. And yeah, this ultimately, the fact that the Ultramarines were able to survive, that would be a big turning point for the Siege of Terra and for Horus's eventual defeat. But that is where I will leave the episode for today. Thank you so much for sitting through it. I hope that was bearable. That was sort of just me rambling for however long this episode ends up being after Gage has worked his magic. But yeah, thank you for being here for this episode. If you're here on the YouTube, as I said before, give us a like if you liked the video. If you didn't like the video, I don't know, we're still going to keep making them regardless, so be it. If you have things that you want to say, if there's anything that you want to correct me on from this episode, let us know down below for sure. If you haven't already, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you are subscribed and you haven't checked that notification bell, please feel free to throw that on. We do upload on a routine schedule, but either way, it's still handy to have that notification. If you're on the Spotify, drop us a like, give us a download, that really helps us out for sure. And yeah, feel free to share us around if there's anybody that you think would enjoy this. And with that, I will leave you for this week, and then I believe next week we will start getting into the Siege of Terra, so stay tuned for that. Bye!